guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Tulis.
The happy talk in Washington bodes evil for Chattanooga and Hamilton County. And if you, my listener, are just passing through town, you're on the interstate, and you're tuning into your favorite Chattanooga area radio station, that's Nooga Radio, for you too, and for the people in your town and your state. This is David Tulis. I do thank you for joining me for a couple of minutes. Thank you for giving the thumbs up on my bow tie today. I'm wearing my pink bow tie on my blood red shirt, which it sounds pretty bad, but it really doesn't look that bad. Though I think I give this brown jacket to a very nice linen jacket a bit too much wear. We have a bitter enemy of local economy, and that is all things that centralize into government. When you have government centralization of a function, you have an evil consequence in the hinterlands. And we here in Tennessee are to the good people in Washington and New York, we are the hinterlands. We are the forgotten part of the world that really doesn't exist for them. We are not important, and we're just data. We're just comprised, perhaps a blip or a name in the data collection that comes streaming at these officials so that they might better control things and influence things for their own good and for the good of the state. Right, the state's interest is paramount. The state is, of course, the way things are. The strip mining national economy that we have, run by government, with government feeding on itself, feeding on every point where there can be some profit to be seized from the private sector and from the corporate sector. Grandma Yellin is the head of the Federal Reserve System and is giving testimony again. But what we get from her is more central bank, Federal Reserve, happy talk about the economy. And I think that Ron Paul, the biggest statesman that we have in this country, the only real national statesman, is right when he calls her a false prophet, a false prophet of prosperity. And he points out how Ben Bernanke and others who are predecessors misread the economy. Bernanke was saying, even as the economy was about to collapse in one of its bubbles, that everything was fine, and that there is some sluggishness in the housing market, he said, but it won't affect the economy, and that it would expand, of course, in 2007 and 8, and that of course is the great meltdown that ruined many people in Chattanooga, especially in the building trades. And Grandma she's in this kind of highly enunciated New Englandese dialect, is telling very positive things and denying that we have multiple debt bubbles in the economy. We have a housing sector debt bubble. We have an equity debt bubble in the Dow and in the marketplace. It reached another high yesterday. And there are other bubbles in the student debt, the $1 trillion student debt bubble, and also in used cars. There's a used car bubble as well. And President Trump has said he wants to roll back regulations in the banking sector, but that doesn't really solve the problem. If you have the problem of subsidizing risky acts, and that's what happens whenever you have a subsidy, a floor or a guarantee, a floor meaning you can't fall below this level, or you have backing or guarantee by government. FDIC, for example, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC guarantees deposits in lenders which are by definition bankrupt. They're bankrupt. They can't make their payments. They have too many claims out, too many promises out. And if you don't roll back deposit insurance, I mean, you kill deposit insurance entirely. You're just gonna subsidize more taking of risks. And of course, in the American paper money system, the benefit of success breeds excess. That's what we had in 2008, and that is what we face today. There's excess all over. Just look in the housing, in the building sector in Chattanooga. This is a boom and it is excessive. There's not real demand for all these hotels, all these buildings. How many new tire stores and garages can we afford here? And do we really need all of this capacity, this retail capacity? Last year, the Mercatus Center did a study, and of course, it identified the big players of municipal bankruptcy. That would be Illinois with $14 trillion in debt and $14 billion in debt and $120 billion in retirement obligations to its highly favored union people who were on its staff. There are at least 4 other states that are facing economic trouble. Ron Paul says some fiscal conservatives are praising the administration's proposal to finance transportation spending by government bonds. However, the people will eventually have to pay for these bonds either directly through income taxes or indirectly through the inflation tax. And remember that inflation, which the government is trying to make at 2% a year, if it could just get to the target, right, is a tax. He says government-issued bonds harm the economy by diverting investment capital away from the private sector to the mixed economy. And that's what we have. Even here in Chattanooga, we have a mixed economy, which he says controlled by politicians, bureaucrats, and crony capitalists. There is a crisis ahead. And that's why we have here people on the program such as Dennis Schroeder, whom we want to help you become more prosperous in your small business. By what he does, he's a kind of a cost auditor or cost analyst, a business savings advisor at Nova Advisors .us, and he helps you become more prosperous. Ron Paul says, if Congress continues to increase spending and the Federal Reserve continues to facilitate that spending by monetizing debt, that's what's happening. Americans will face an economic crisis more severe than the Great Depression. Of course, the Great Depression is not the 2008 meltdown. It's the one in the 1930s. The crisis will likely result from a rejection of the dollar as the world's currency. Those of us who know the truth must redouble our efforts, he says, to ensure a peaceful transition away from the Keynesian system of welfare, warfare, and fiat currency to a society of peace, prosperity, and liberty. So we have these housing, student debt, and used car loans and stock bubbles that are illusory gains, illusory strength in the market based on promises to pay in the future. And there is, but in the part of the federal government, about 150, maybe 170 trillion dollars in obligations, and $20 trillion in actual debt in the treasury markets. 20 trillion dollars just about debt, and the government is debating still about raising the debt ceiling. Well, this is David Tulis, and my prognosis for the national economy is bleak. And you, my listener, I would urge that you find ways of divesting nationally, getting out of these inflated markets, and investing locally. So it's a kind of a step into cash, out from abstract investments into cash. That's probably the best thing I think you can do, and maintain your assets. Now, the goal right now is not to make a profit in the national economy. The goal is to reserve your buying power and preserve it. And part of that process I have consistently suggested is investing locally, investing in local businesses, or investing in perhaps the business of a daughter or a son. Maybe you have a wife who needs capital, and so you can liquidate a mutual fund and help her. Now, when I say these things, I have a sense of urgency when I consider the Breitbart account today, an essay by Rand Paul, the son of our great statesman, Ron Paul. Rand is not quite as thoroughgoing as his dad, but in this an exclusive posting in the past day or so at Breitbart, he makes the case against the Republicans who are going to keep Obamacare. Okay, but the Republicans are not going to overturn Obamacare, even though it has been something that they have promised for 8 years since President Obama took and then left office. He says Obamacare regulations are still there. Taxes, well, many are still in place, totaling hundreds of billions of dollars. Okay, the Republicans are not going to get rid of Obamacare taxes. Insurance company bailouts, those two, he says, remember when Republicans complained about Obamacare's risk corridors. Remember, he says, when we called the corridors nothing more than insurance company bailouts. I remember when one prominent GOP candidate during a presidential debate explicitly called out the Obamacare risk corridors as a bailout to insurance companies. Does anyone else? He asks. Now, the Senate GOP plan being put forward is chock full of insurance bailout money to the tune of nearly $200 billion. $200 billion bailout by the Republicans of insurance, for-profit insurance corporations. Republicans, present company excluded, says Rand Paul, now support the idea of lowering your insurance premium by giving a subsidy to the insurance company. And he says the possibilities are limitless once you accept the federal government should subsidize prices. I remember when Republicans favored the free choice of the marketplace. The Senate Obamacare bill does not repeal Obamacare. I want to repeat that so everyone realizes why I'll vote no as it now stands. It's not even close, he says. It's not even close toward a repeal. He says the bill will transfer billions of dollars to people who will then transfer billions of dollars to insurance companies. What a great business model. Encourage the federal government to use taxpayer money to buy a private company's product. Great business model, that is, if you are big insurance. The Obamacare light bill does what the Democrats forgot to do: appropriate billions for Obamacare's cost-sharing reductions, aka subsidies. Really, Republicans are going to fund Obamacare subsidies that the Democrats forgot to fund. He is simply angry. He is simply infuriated by this bill that will continue to bring ruin in its sector across local economy. And he asks a great question. He says, well, if you have an insurance stabilization fund to lower insurance prices, well, maybe now support a car stabilization fund to lower the prices of cars. Or maybe the GOP would support an iPhone stabilization fund to lower the price of phones. It is that party is bankrupt. That because the National Republican Party is bankrupt, and because that its cancer spreads really very, very far. I think you should be, as I am, wary of being a Republican, wary of talking Republicans, wary about hearing strategies among Republicans on how we can do better and how we can beat the Democrats and the like. They're not able to save the country. There is no salvation for national humiliation in the credit markets by the Republican Party. And that the idea that we offer here at the David Tulis program at Nooga Radio is local economy. And what I like about local economy, it's nonpartisan. The idea here is that because we're in Chattanooga, because we live here, we need to find out where the enemies really are. The enemies are in both parties, and those enemies are in Nashville and they are in Washington and New York. They're not in favor of us at all. They are part of the strip mining governmental national economy nexus, if you will, that is only looking out for its own survival. And the people who run that system, the top 0.05% of the people, the great high flying, high earners, they think the economy is going great. They think that everything is fine. And yet the proportion of wages to GDP continues to plunge. It's been going down for 20 years. Wages are worth less and less. And we have in our economy today, we have operation of cartels. We don't have a free market, and we should be grieved at it and think, what do we have to do to get away? We can't reform the system. Okay, that's why I don't have much hope in politics. I do think there's a lot of hope in legal resistance by being a defendant, right? Because if you have a defendant, you can make a petition to a judge to overturn a wicked law or a wicked system. So there is some hope for defense of constitutional rights and property rights, and the individual in the judiciary. There's some, not a lot, but much of what has to happen in the larger scale, aside from defensive individual actions, is this overall goal of self-determination, government here in local economy and the free market in Chattanooga and beyond. Tom Humphrey has a good story about officials in Tennessee government which are so jealous of their documents that they at a state museum the officials demanded that a reporter from the Nashville Scene, a newspaper, file an open records request to get a copy of an agenda. This is simply a pretty amazing story. The Tennessee State Museum staffer, Tom Humphrey, says, got a copy of an agenda for Monday's meeting of the museum's governing board from a reporter's hand and declared that she would have to file an open records, a formal open records request to see it, according to the Nashville Scene. The reporter is Carrie Wade Gervin, who, after one episode, penned an article on the Douglas Hyde State Museum Commission's vote at the Monday meeting to adopt a new code of ethics that former Knoxville Mayor Victor Ashe, a member of the board who was absent, labeled a gag order. It puts new restrictions on commission members speaking publicly about museum operations. Okay, so that's the larger story. But on the side, there's this attempt to block a reporter from getting a copy of the agenda. Gervin went to pick up a meeting agenda packet and was informed that she would have to file a written open records request with the Attorney General's office to see one. When she tried to take a picture of one, it was grabbed out of her hand by Mary Skinner, the museum's media relations officer. When House Speaker Beth Harwell, a commission member, gave Gervin her copy, museum staff attempted to take that one too. To be clear, a state employee attempted to stop a member of the press from reading a public record that should be made readily available to the public, according to the Nashville Scene. This actually is against the law. It looks like it's an intentional attempt to keep the information from the public, says Deborah Fisher, executive director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. This commission has gone off the deep end. Well, I hope you think about that and realize that you, my listener, you're part of the press too. You're part of the press because we here think that you report and the world decides. We are open to hearing from you. My number here on the show is 800-8949. That's 800-8949. And if you want to call to interrupt me, you can do that. Okay, I'll let you do that if you want to make note of that number and give me a ring at some point during the show. There's a good story about law enforcement that I'm going to be publishing from Joel McDermott. And it asks a question about police enforcement and law enforcement. I'd like to think that God in his grace will over time bring such revival of moral sentiment and virtue among Americans that they will vote out law enforcement altogether, that there won't be any law enforcement at all, and that what will happen will be a return to the people of that function. The function originally was keeping the peace. Now, that meant that if there was an assault, there was a robbery or a beating or a woman's purse in the hand of a fleeing man running toward a fence at the edge of a parking lot, or a car accident where one of the participants in that accident drives away wildly in his car, that the people would bring that one to account. And in the fantasy that I have in this future republic, where there's widespread blessing and widespread regard for the Ten Commandments, everybody would be armed, but the police would be disarmed. But the police would represent the law. If there are police, they would represent the power of the state to bring to bar a person for a wrong, right? Not just a tort, but a wrong against the people, right? Wrong against a law or a statute. And that police officer, being unarmed, would have the authority to call on the citizenry nearby to help him. So that would be to stop somebody, to bring someone to the magistrate, right? When you're arrested, you should never go to the jail. You should go to the magistrate. And I'm not sure what the statute is in Tennessee, but everybody is routinely, when arrested by Chattanooga City Police, taken to the jail. It should be to the magistrate first. First, the magistrate, and then the jail. But when that happens, that arrest is brought about by the people. The officer is simply the one to take the person in. That would be a much safer place in which to live, and the citizens are freer. Because if the citizens live in fear of armed men, armed gangs, whether they're private or public, then we're not a free people. And I've got a call coming in, and it's too late to take it. But I will take it. You've got half a minute.
Quickly, if someone interferes with an arrest, let's say I do something that the police considers illegal, and a citizen comes in to arrest me, I'm going to kick him in his face. Because basically, he's not bound by the Constitution, and the police are. They have to obey the Bill of Rights, or there could be a tort. So I'll be damned if I'm going to let the average citizen put their hands on me without me responding. But if an officer's doing it lawfully, I have no recourse but to say, okay, you have an argument, let's go to court and fight over it.
Great point. Thanks, Mike. That was Mike Steele. This is David Tulis. Thanks for joining us here at Nooga Radio, AM 1240, live on YouTube, live on Facebook. Go to Nooganomics.com for the Deep State Report of Tennessee. David Tulis.
Nooga Radio, AM 1240, 92.7 FM.
Does your business have enough clients? Are you confused about how to stand out and